Good afternoon, Year 5 and Year 6, and welcome back to History. So I hope you enjoyed the start of our topic last term. We are continuing to learn a little bit more about the Mayans, and we're going to focus in today about the events over time. We learned last week about how extensive the ancient Mayan empire was, and now we are going to kind of really think about the dates within that we have been able to discover that things happened or changed. So we're going to be creating timelines. Our big question, which I will just add a question mark to think about the whole session today, is how accurate are ancient timelines? I'm not saying it was made, ancient times, but actually we've made it now in more modern days from thousands of years ago. How accurate would that be? So we're going to think about archaeologists. How do we discover facts? How do we look at artifacts that were discovered in those ancient ruins? Think about the accuracy of the information we've gathered, and also be able to present that information chronologically. Chronologically means in order. Okay, so you've got your not your fast five, that's maths. You've got your just checking. Pause here if you're in year 5, and that will be on your quiz. And then I'll change the screen for your year 6 questions. I won't go through the answers on this video because you'll be able to get your answers when you go on to Teams to do your quiz. So, as a reminder, our powerful person, Pakal the Great. We have our king. Now, interestingly, you'll see his name spelled different here with a C rather than a K. It's another thing to think about, the fact that things over time have been, discovered in tombs or in ancient ruins, and it's quite interesting to see that different spellings of his name have been brought, and that's quite common from ancient history. It's never going to be exactly accurate because it happened such a long time ago. So I just wanted to really, you can pause the screen and read this, but I really wanted to highlight to you that actually Pakal expanded the Maya states. It started with a small kind of group of people, and he really expanded. And he built new pyramids, he built those temples, and actually all the architecture that we've now found really was brought on by him. So he really is key to us learning as much as we have about the ancient Mayans. Now, the dynasty back then seems to have had queens as well, but only when there was not a male heir. And I thought I would mention that because actually that was the case in England with our royalty up until very recently. It had to be a male heir, and only if there wasn't a male heir, there would be then a queen rather than a king. So similarly, in England, that was only changed recently, that now actually if the firstborn is a girl, then it could be a female heir. So you can pause the screen and have a little read of the rest of that, a little bit more information about Pakal the Great. Okay, as a bit of a starter today then, these are some of the artifacts that were discovered in the Mayan villages. Now, I will just oh no, I've shown that answer. Oh, hopefully you didn't see it. I forgot I put the answers underneath. I want you to pause the screen and think about what could they have been used for. So imagine an ancient civilization, and we've discovered these artifacts. What could they be, and what could they have been used for? So pause the screen and see if any of your guesses end up being accurate. Okay, well, I will start with the one that I accidentally gave you a sneak preview. This is an ocarina. It is a musical instrument. You hold it in your hands, and similar to kind of a recorder, you would blow into, I can't see which one would be the blowhole, and you would cover some of those other finger holes, and it would create different tones of music. Now, we actually have some ocarinas in school, but they are now made of plastic and not whatever material they have carved this instrument out of. So I'd be really impressed if you said musical instrument. Really well done. Okay, moving on to this. I do wonder what kind of guesses you came up with. It is actually a hoop for a game called Pock-a-Tock. It's also called Pock-to-Pock. There's a few different names for it. But it's a sport that the Maya people played, and to get the ball through the hoop got you points. Again, very similar to games we play now. Again, I'll be really impressed if you got that. And finally, You may have got this one. This was a calendar. You may have seen this because the Maya calendar has been in the news over the last kind of couple of years, but this was what they used to track the days and the months. You may have thought it was a clock, and I think you get maybe half a point if you said clock, because it's definitely about measuring time. Now, all of these artifacts we know about because they were discovered in the ancient ruins of the Maya villages. So remember last week, we had the Spanish conquistadors who turned up to Mesoamerica, that central bit of America, deep in the rainforest, and they found these cities. Now, actually, in the 16th century, when that happened, when they came across, they didn't really do much investigating. Your questions last week were actually far better, really trying to think about why did they leave? What did you use this for? What materials is this made out of? So actually, not until 150 years later, the 19th century, so the 1800s, historians and archaeologists actually began to investigate the remains and really unpick what the Maya people were about, finding all of these artifacts, finding all of them, investigating them. And with that, we were able to kind of piece together what the life would have been like. So, as I said, archaeologists, and that's people who do this job, they go and they investigate the artifacts left behind. And they were actually able to learn a lot about them. They found a wealth of information. They also were able to find out a lot about how the society was organized, about the kings, about the farmers, about the temples, the worship, the palaces. They were able to do that, kind of piecing together like a kind of an investigator, piecing it all together. And this is one of the Mayan temples, the picture here. A lot of information was found there. You know, it was a temple built to worship a god, and they found out a lot about the gods through the inscriptions on the materials, through the artifacts left behind. So they were really able to piece together so much information. They also discovered some of these. You may have seen this funeral mask of King Pakal before. I think I showed it last week, or it was in the diagram. There's more instruments there. There's Mayan flutes. There's also a stone slab, and it's called a stele. And these have been found with the hieroglyphs on. And this, again, once we were able to decode them, we were able to find out about Mayan life. They had their own writing system, which was pictures that represented words. And people were able to study these hieroglyphs until they understood what they meant, which also helped us to find out so much more about them. So I've just, you can pause the screen here and play the same game as we played at the beginning. Try and guess what some of these things may have been used for. I haven't got all the answers because actually we don't have all of the answers. There are some things that we can make predictions, we can make educated guesses, but we will never know exactly what they were used for. Some of them might have been toys or decoration and didn't actually have a practical use. Here are some more. Some of them are quite recognizable. A bowl, instruments. We've got some sort of kind of weapon, perhaps for hunting, masks. Perhaps this is a picture of a god. These are some of the actual artifacts. These are now held in museums that were found. Okay, so what we were able to do then is we've found all these artifacts. We have really spent years and years and years encrypting what they tell us. From that, we were able to put together a timeline of those elements. And as I mentioned at the beginning, as I talk about these, I want you to think about how accurate are all of these going to be. Okay, so let me read some of these to you. So a very big span here, 5,000 to 2000 BC. Hunter-gatherers lived in the rainforest and volcanic mountains. We know that from other investigations. But between 2000 BC and 1000 BC, again, that's 1,000 years, people began to farm and settle together in villages. They began to use crafts of the Olmec people, making pottery. They carved with jade, that's that greeny blue material, and basic trades were developed between the villages. In 900 BC, farmers began to use irrigation systems to help their plants grow. And we've learned a little bit about irrigation before with the water cycle. We need to get water out to all of the plants. This means that larger settlements can now form. The bigger their farming industry, the more people would be able to live off the food. Now we think that at 300 BC, the first cities began to develop and the Mayan population grew rapidly. In 292 BC, the first known Mayan writing is produced in the hieroglyphs. The first temple is built in 50 BC. In 250 AD, the Maya begin their most powerful era. We've got astronomy, mathematics, architecture are all developing. In 300 AD, the Maya adopt the idea of a monarchy, and now they are ruled by kings. We've talked about that. In between 500 and 800 AD, major cities develop and thrive. And there's a list of those major cities there. The temples and palaces are built, art, culture, religion, all reach their peak. So between that kind of 300-year span, this is where the Maya civilization really came into its own. And between 800 and 900 AD, the major cities began to decline. So only, 100 years later, they were being abandoned. And to add to that, there's actually evidence to say that they were abandoned due to drought. Again, we've learned about drought. That means lack of water, lack of rain. The farming industry would have crumbled without the water. People moved away, they moved to local areas, and that coincides with the Spanish then arriving and seeing only remains. That works, doesn't it? That actually, if by 900 AD, this is still 500, 600 years before the Spanish arrive, if it started to decline then, it would make sense that there was very little left, 500 years later. When the Spanish arrive, they actually think that they destroy anything that's left, any people still living in the villages. And then in the 18th century, we just heard about, we've got explorers, we've got writers, we've got archaeologists, historians, they all turn up and they actually start to document everything they found. Okay, and still now, we are still discovering more cities. In 2014, that's only 6 or 7 years ago, we are still discovering more information. Okay, so that is a kind of general timeline. Now think about, why is there a 300-year span for an event happening? Pause the screen. Why don't we know exactly when these things happened? Okay, I really hope you've had a think about the fact that actually we're finding this out from archaeology. We're finding this out from pictures that we think we have worked out the meaning. There may be dates in those pictures, and fantastic, if they named their years the same as we name our years, then that's brilliant. But for the most part, we have had to use our best guesses. That will include how old the actual material is, which archaeologists can study. And if they can see that it's about this old, we can't put an exact date on it. The only things you don't put an exact date on is if they put a date on the hieroglyphs or on the item they were making. And even then, did they use the same year system as we do now? Definitely not. So it is a big challenge. So here's a very similar timeline. You'll notice that the dates are different. And this is the message I really want you to think about, is with our ancient civilizations, we have to be really careful to know that it is a best fit. We do not know the exact date something happened. So this has similar farming, building, writing happening. It actually has the calendar being invented on there. Similarly, about the kings and the pyramids, that's all fairly similar. Then we've got the central regions being created. We've got Pakal the Great dying. Again, there may be things written about that, and so perhaps that's more accurate. Then we've got sites being abandoned, and then the Europeans coming. Some of that is exactly the same, and some of it is slightly different. So bear that in mind when you're creating your timelines, that actually we have to use our best historical knowledge to piece together things that happened thousands of years ago. There's probably not ever going to be an exactly perfect timeline, but we have to use what we know. So just to go over that vocabulary, we've got drought there, a long period with very little rain, and an archaeologist. They use objects and buildings that people in the past have left behind to learn about history. Okay, so you are going to be doing a quiz now about ordering those events. I would recommend rewatching this section of the video so it's fresh in your mind. I'm not going to expect you to know the exact dates. I've put that on the quiz, but about the order that things happened. Now, there's also another task coming up, and that's mainly for children in school. But if you would like to do it and email it in to your year group, then that would be fantastic. So in school, you're going to be using the information to create an interactive display of the events. So I'll make this a little bit bigger so you can see each of these. This is of the Titanic. You see they've used boats to show each of the events happening. This one is brilliant and of the Stone Age. Let me just make that one bigger and bring it forward. I love the stepped and coloured approaches. They've got pictures with each of the dates. That's so fantastically clear. The same with the Egyptians. They added, it's a kind of standard across ways, horizontal ways timeline, but they've added the pictures. And with the World War I, sorry, this one is, again, they've got real clear pictures highlighting to make it really clear. So those of you in school, you're going to create one in your book. If you're at home and you would like to create one of those and email it in, that would be fantastic. That's what you'll need in terms of the dates and the statements, which you can also find on the Teams quiz. And I'll just finish off with reminding you to think and reflect on how accurate are ancient timelines and why do we find that they change slightly depending on who's writing them. So I hope you've got a little bit more information now about the Mayans, and I look forward to seeing your work when you complete your quizzes. Well done, guys.